Okay, this is Screencast, chapters 1, 2, and 3, part 3. We last left off saying we were going to begin on this slide, which is basically we're talking still about what is art and how to define art. In the 21st century, even some artists have kind of sought to challenge the very definition of art. So if you know an artist, a lot of times that's something that artists kind of do. We always kind of buck the system and want to push the boundaries and make challenging thoughts and provoking type of artwork. But when you are posed with this question, is a dead animal locked in a glass case a work of art? How do you answer that? If you are a hunter, you might say, well, we taxidermy our deer and hang them on the wall, so it's really not that different. But this question comes from a place of, I know when I was in undergraduate school, I had a professor who had a glass case with a dead deer in it, and the deer had maggots eating away at it, and he said it was a work in progress. And I remember thinking, okay, this guy is really strange. Don't come from a family of hunters. I am from Southern Illinois, so hunting isn't a foreign idea to me, but it is one of those things where I don't necessarily look at a decaying animal and think that that is a work of art. So just one of those things to kind of challenge you. Now again, back to Damien Hirst, that British artist we were looking at with the skulls. This is him standing in front of one of his most famous pieces of art, and it is a glass enclosed case with a rotting cow's head complete with the maggots. You see the bug light up there and the flies and the bug zapper, and this is kind of interesting when you think of these are his most famous pieces. This looks like something that you might find on a farm, not necessarily what you would see in an art gallery or a museum. So you can see how some of these things are kind of pushing our boundaries and pushing our buttons to see if we are challenging ourselves to think more about what is defined as art. This is another Damien Hirst piece that is the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. So what we're seeing here is a glass case filled with formaldehyde, and it has a dead shark inside this case. Now, this does kind of bring me back to the fact that this piece is a sold piece. It's not just the artist-owned piece of work, but the shark in the formaldehyde floating in there. Okay, let's say I went out and I caught this fish and I want to have it mounted like the taxidermy. Okay, it would look better than this. I mean, this looks kind of like it's rotting and decaying, and it just doesn't even look like it was well preserved. And that was part of the issue with this particular piece. The person who bought this, it started to decaying and falling apart, so he had to hire a fisherman in Australia to catch another fish, send it back, and they had to redo it. So how many times is he going to have to do this because it's not being done well to begin with? Okay, this is another piece. You see a art viewer looking at what is a glass case filled with formaldehyde with half of a cow in it, a baby cow. And it is actually called Mother and Calf Divided. So when we're looking at this, I myself as an artist, I don't necessarily say in my mind this is good art, but I do find value in it. And just from the learning aspect, I have kids of my own who are interested in going into the medical field, and there's just something that is interesting about this, about what does it look inside of a body versus that not knowing what it looks like. This is another piece by Damien Hirst. Beautiful. It looks like stained glass windows, right? It's beautifully done. But when you look at it up close, here's Damien Hirst in front of another piece that's very similar to that. You can now see that all the color and all those pieces, those are actually butterflies. So these are mounted butterflies to make these stained glass looking pieces. So again, back to the whole animal rights, all of those things. I understand the anger that people would have. They are very beautiful, but you're also killing creatures. Okay, now this is not a Damien Hirst piece. This is actually a photograph of a viewer, and this woman's reaction, I think, would be most people's reaction. It is a slice of an obese human body. So like the mother and calf divided, but here we have a human body. And this comes from the Body Works exhibit. There's also a Body Worlds exhibit that they have several of these. They travel around the world. You can go to different places and see them. I know St. Louis has had them a few years ago, had one of the shows. And what this is this is actually human bodies that these people have donated themselves. Instead of to science, they have donated themselves to these shows. So these are actual human beings. They are injected in with a two-part kind of epoxy resin, plasticine resin into their bodies. And these are just a couple examples that are showing you what it looks like. So, you know, what does the human body look like? The muscles, everything going on in certain positions. Some of them are of, you know, a guy going up and kicking a soccer ball and what that looks like in that motion without the skin. They also have horses that are done like that. Sometimes they don't even have the muscles. They just have the veins and the arteries, and looking at different organ systems and circulatory systems. We're looking at this, and it's supposed to be somewhat like it's art, but you know, again, there's still a lot to be learned from this as far as, let's say, from the science medical side. This is a choice by the individual. I know myself, though, if I walked in and I saw Uncle Stanley up there without his skin, I would be kind of freaked out. Also, you know, it's just a little too much for some people to handle. Now, I'm sorry for my animation there. This is kind of old, but this is the sperm cube. So this is a French artist that collected a ton of sperm in a clear box and displayed it as art. A ton of sperm. It is not all from the same person, so this is donations from many people. This one is one of those that when we talk about art, senses come into play. You know, do you want to kind of come up and touch things? You know, those kind of things. How many of you have ever seen a painting and it has thick globs of paint, and you want to go up and you want to kind of push on it and see, is that hard or is that still soft? You know, those kind of urges are sensory urges. This is one of those that, oh boy, does this gross me out. I mean, it's really way too much to think about. Now, again, defining art. Artists are always challenging us. Here we see a urinal, and a urinal is basically something that is designed and created by someone, correct? The designer of a tennis shoe designed that shoe, and then after that, everybody's going around and decorating that tennis shoe in different ways. Well, this is basically taking a urinal and an artist signing it like, this is art, even though they didn't design the original urinal, but because they put their name on it and put it out and displayed it as art, you know, we're supposed to take it at face value that it's art. I sometimes think you need to challenge the idea of some of these things. Sure, the original person who designed it, that's the artist. Someone who comes along and signs just any random object and says it's art and puts it on display, I myself disagree with that. Okay, so here we have the Moors murders. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the Moors murders. The Moors is an area in England, and it is an area in which they had kind of a really bad stalking type of situation, and that they had some serial killers on the loose. And The serial killers were a boyfriend and girlfriend combination. And the boyfriend and girlfriend combination, basically what they did is that they, the woman would lure in the victim and then the guy would kill. Now, of course, we've all heard of, you know, the serial killers and murders and all of these different situations, right? It's sad to say that we are not unfamiliar with this as a concept. But when we look at this, it being a couple in a combination and luring in the victims were children. And why it's called the moors is because this is where they put the bodies in a certain area. And these being children, it's kind of a morbid thought, but this is an artist who, Marcus Harvey, who took advantage of this situation and created a portrait of the female of this murdering serial killer couple, and her name was Myra. And this is a piece that is 9 foot by 11 foot, so larger than life. It is a pretty good representation, almost like a pointillism, impressionistic type of work. That is a picture of her. But you know, if you don't know the background or the story, the narrative behind some of the artwork that you look at, you might look at this and go, oh, it's a portrait of someone named Myra. But what you don't know, unless you know about her being a serial killer and serial killer of children, this is made from the overlapping handprints of children. No, it's not of the actual children. It's the artist kind of made a stamp in the shape of a child's hand and then used that to repeatedly kind of make dots, and that's where the portrait comes out. Eek! That's horrible, isn't it? To take and exploit something that horrific. Now, we need to start talking about different definitions and terminology of art. Now that hopefully I've covered enough things to kind of throw out there, some things that maybe you didn't know people consider to be art, and challenge you yourself on what you would consider to be art. So forms of art. So what is a form? A form is basically a shape turned into 3 dimensions. So when we look at this particular sculpture of wood, it somewhat has this snake-like, cobra-like look to it. That's the form. It doesn't give us tons of information. It's just the overall 3-dimensional shape. You know, we do this here. Another piece of carved wood looks like flames. So we understand that as, you know, fire. It's that basics, okay? Now, the artist, Constantine Brancusi, here we see a concept of his, which is this basic sketch or drawing that we see on the left side of the screen, and then the actual realization of that sketch in a 3-dimensional form. This is called Endless Column. It's one of his more famous pieces. Looking at and hearing the title, of course, is important. Endless Column implies that it could go on. So if we could, technically, you could understand with that title that this repeated shape over and over and over and over and over again could go on into infinity, which we have the title Endless Column. Now here's Brancusi in his studio, and here you can see in the background he has many endless columns, many materials, and many sizes. So he kind of, you know, does this whole exploring that shape. Okay, he unlike a lot of artists, once we kind of master, let's say, realism, that's generally the beginning goal of most artists, is to make something look like it's supposed to look, then we kind of go, okay, now I'm going to take a step back, and how can I get simplified? How can I still get my point across or my concept across, but without doing tons and tons of stuff to it? Okay, so I'm going to end here on this slide. We will begin on the next slide with fish, Brancusi's fish.